What's up, y'all? I'm a little winded right now. Give me a second. Alex Alonso, Street TV, and I'm just catching my breath. And we're gonna go through this. We're gonna go through this motion that the prosecution filed yesterday regarding the Tory Lanez case, and then I'm gonna go through possible sentences that he's gonna receive, and what will happen on June 13th next month when the defense responds to this particular motion that the prosecution filed. Now, all along, I've always been advocating for a fair sentence for this brother, but unfortunately, the prosecution is going to go hard, and there's a variety of reasons why they're going hard, and I understand why they're going hard, but if you read this motion and read all the details, you can tell they're going hard. Now, I'll have a link down in the description to the actual filing if you're interested in it for yourself. But I'm going to go through it real quick. It was filed on May 23rd. And in the beginning of this motion, they go through an introduction. They talk about Tory Lanez was found guilty of 3 counts. Of course, count 1 is assault with the firearm. Count 2 is having a concealed firearm in the vehicle. And count 3 is the negligent discharging of the firearm. And then, of course, the jury also found true 2 enhancements. So you could look at that as like 5 different charges, 5 different things, 3 charges, 2 enhancements, 5 things that Tory Lanez could be sentenced on. Now, what's interesting is that recently California law made an amendment to the Penal Code of 1170, stating that the court shall not sentence a defendant to the maximum term, and the maximum they should use is the midterm. Now, every one of these sentences has a low, a mid, and a high, and I'll go through that in detail after I go through this motion. But the law says you have to impose the medium sentence at most. And the reason why they're doing that is because there's been significant sentences passed down over the years to individual, and judges have maxed people out, and judges have ran sentences consecutively. And this amendment in the bill is trying to prevent long sentences and also to deal with prison overcrowding. So then the motion continues to say that that the people intend to file our sentencing memorandum, which will outline additional circumstances and aggravation for the purposes of sentencing. They didn't detail any sentencing requests that they wanted in this filing, but that is going to come soon. But what they wanted to highlight in this filing is that they're trying to establish that there were aggravating circumstances. And when you can establish the aggravating circumstances, you don't have to follow the new bill that amends the sentencing guidelines, restricting judges of giving the maximum sentence. So in other words, if you can show that there are aggravating circumstances, the court is now allowed to sentence to the max. So what this filing is showing is that the prosecution wants to say, hey, we understand that the maximum sentence for Tory Lanez is the midterm, but we want to establish that there was an aggravating circumstance so that we can impose a maximum sentence. Okay, so in Section 2 of this filing, circumstances and aggravation, this is where they explain what the aggravation was. This crime involved great violence, great bodily harm, threat of great bodily harm, or other acts disclosing a high degree of cruelty, viciousness, and callousness. On July 12th of 2020, The defendant shouted at the victim, "Dance, B," and pointed a gun at her and fired multiple rounds, striking both feet. Defendant was upset that victim had insulted his music career without any justifiable provocation or reason. Defendant fired several rounds to both of her feet and was bleeding profusely. Bullet fragments penetrated both her feet. Victim was placed under general anesthesia and fragments were removed during surgery. Removal of the foreign body's bullet fragments by Dr. Little and Dr. Haruno required additional cutting into the victim for adequate debridement of the fragments and the cleaning of the tissue from the victim's right foot. Victim had 1.5 centimeter wound from which doctors were able to remove a large bullet fragment from victim's left foot. Doctors removed 2 fragments from a 4 by 4 centimeter wound. Given the extent of her injuries to her left foot, victim was missing the top layer of her skin. Now you could actually, I have a link below that you could actually look at the exhibits that show the photos of the injuries of the injury to her left foot. The left foot is the one that sustained most of the injuries, but they were relatively minor. She got bandaged up and was able to walk out of there the next day. The injuries and the resultant surgery would produce permanent scarring to both her feet. Smaller metallic shrapnel or fragments that could not be removed without risking greater harm to the victim are now permanently embedded in her feet. So if you take a look at the x-rays of her feet, you can see the large bullet fragments, but there are a whole bunch of tiny, you'll see little specks on the x-ray. Those are also parts of the bullet fragment that the Dr. Haruno, Lee Haruno, said that he was only able to remove the large parts and he left inside all of the smaller parts in her foot. Had the wounds had been left untreated and the larger fragments unremoved, there was risk victim would be symptomatic and suffer persistent pain and or infection. Victim went through physical therapy for several months, received stitches, and was in significant pain. Nearly a year and a half later, at trial, victim testified that she continues to suffer from nerve damage and experience soreness, particularly when she has to perform as part of her work. One thing that's interesting in this memorandum is that Dr. Haruno said that there was no nerve damage after he removed those bullet fragments. But I think Megan did say that I guess she interpreted what she was going through in her foot was nerve damage, but the doctor said there was no nerve damage after he did the surgery. Exhibits introduced at trial in Peoples 26, 27, 34, 35, and 36 further proved victims' extensive injuries, surgery, and post-operative treatment. If you want to check out those exhibits, there'll be a link below with all those exhibits that were presented at trial. The evidence that defendant's crime involved either the threat of great bodily harm or actual great bodily harm was overwhelming, and ultimately the jury agreed when they found it true that the defendant personally inflicted great bodily injury to victim beyond reasonable doubt. Defendant's actions also demonstrated a high level of callousness. As victim began to walk away from the defendant wearing only a bikini and no shoes, defendant mocked the victim with "Dance, B" and opened fire in her direction. With no justifiable reason, defendant fired not just 1, but up to 5 rounds in the direction of the victim in the middle of the residential neighborhood. Now, this residential neighborhood was Nicholas Canyon Road, a very exclusive part of Los Angeles, one of the richest communities in our city. And you just can't be driving around there, arguing on the street and whipping out weapons. He might have been able to get away with this, sadly, if he was on like Crenshaw and Vernon, or on Western and Florence, or if he was on Central and Manchester. But they was up in the hills, up in the Hollywood Hills, just north of South Los Angeles. This act not only directly inflicted great bodily injury to the victim, but posed a significant danger to everyone in the vicinity of this shooting. The brazenness of the defendant's conduct is alarming, but the conscious disregard for the well-being and safety of all those around him signifies a high degree of indifference for human life. Now, going on to the final part of this motion is the California Rules of Court. The defendant was armed with or used a weapon at the time of the commission of the crime. Defendant fired a semi-automatic firearm in the direction of the victim 5 times. Immediately after the shooting, the gun was found at his feet, warm to the touch, and in a slide lock position, indicating defendant had fired every round in that gun. One thing I would say in this part of the motion, the gun was not found at his feet. It was found in the seat that he was apparently sitting in, but he was already out the car, and they found the gun inside the car, so it wasn't found at his feet. He was out the car, so that's just a slight thing that I noticed here in their writing. But it was warm to the touch. There's body cam footage, LAPD body cam footage. As soon as they found that gun and touched it, that gun was hot. And if you bust a few rounds off of a gun, it does get warm. And it was in a slide lock position, indicating defendant had fired every round from that gun. The victim was particularly vulnerable. This is the part where the prosecution is going to argue to the judge that we have additional aggravating circumstances. Therefore, we want to seek the maximum sentence. So this is the most important part of the motion. This is the aggravating circumstance of section. And it says here, the victim was particularly vulnerable. Now, in People v. Smith, 1979, this is an older case, the court held that particularly vulnerable, that's the important term here, particularly vulnerable. They have to prove that Megan Thee Stallion was particularly vulnerable. And this term is not vague, and particularly means in a special or unusual degree to an extent greater than in other cases. And vulnerable is defined as defenseless, unguarded, unprotected, accessible, assailable, or one who is susceptible to the defendant's criminal act. In this case, People v. Eads, 1979, the court found no error in aggravating a sentence on the basis that the victim was particularly vulnerable, where the defendant, without apparent motivation or provocation, from the rear seat in a moving vehicle, shot the victim twice at point-blank range, and where the victim was unaware of the defendant's possession of a weapon and could not protect himself from the defendant's actions, even though the victim was a healthy police officer with firearms within reach. So they're using this case from 1979 to show that the victim in this case was particularly vulnerable. So it has some parallels to this case. The court rejected a narrow interpretation of particularly vulnerable to be applied only where the victim's personal characteristics make them vulnerable. So in other words, particularly vulnerable usually means that you have to have a handicap, you have to be elderly, you have to pregnant women. There has to be some sort of physical ailment. Maybe you have a disability, you're in a wheelchair. But what the prosecutors are going to argue in June is that particularly vulnerable doesn't necessarily have to mean that you have some physical ailment. It could just mean your particular circumstances made you vulnerable. So rather, the court has found that circumstances surrounding the crime, including the time of day, the location of the offense, may render a victim particularly vulnerable. Victim was dressed, now they're talking about Megan Thee Stallion. Victim was dressed in only a bikini, shoeless on foot in a neighborhood completely foreign to her. It was late at night. It was actually early morning when this happened. It was 4 a.m. But she was unarmed and completely defenseless. She was not in possession of her phone or her belongings. As she walked away from the defendant, unaware he was armed with a firearm, defendant fired multiple rounds at victim, striking her bare feet. She was afforded no opportunity and was in no position to defend herself, find cover, or shield herself in any way. Besides an argument in the car, there was no justifiable provocation or event that would have signaled to her that defendant would have fired a gun at her. Not just once, but 5 times. Victim was taken entirely by surprise. Given the surrounding circumstances, she was particularly vulnerable. And in conclusion, based on the foregoing, the prosecution respectfully requests the court to find true, beyond a reasonable doubt, the circumstances and aggravation and pursuant to California rules of the court as to the defendant. So if the judge happens to agree with that finding that Megan Thee Stallion was particularly vulnerable, that means that Tory Lanez will be eligible for a maximum sentence, and that the prosecution is going to go in for the max. It sounds like if you read this filing, that's what the tone is. Now we're going to talk about the possible sentences here, and then I'll answer a couple of questions. So when it comes to the sentences, remember there are three felony charges he was found guilty of, and there are 2 enhancements. So I have a chart here that's going to break this down, and we'll go through the possible sentences that Tory Lanez is facing. Let's see here. Okay. Now you can see here, let me just make this full screen. And so count 1 carries a sentence. Count 1 would be the assault with the firearm. Count 1 carries a sentence from 3 to 9 years, 3 being the max. 3 being the minimum, 9 being the max. Now remember, under the new amended California law, the legislators changed the law saying the judges the max that the judges can impose is the midterm, but unless there's some aggravating circumstances. So in count 1, the most he can get is the 6 years. But if there's aggravating circumstances, they can go for the 9 now. Count two is a 1 year sentence. So that doesn't matter. There's no minimum, maximum, or middle or minimum. And count 2 is the possessing of a concealed unregistered firearm in the car. And then count 3 is a little interesting because in normal conditions, in normal circumstances, it's a 1 year sentence. Count 3 is the negligent discharging of a firearm, but depending on the circumstances of the case, that sentence is eligible for up to 3 years. So I have here in parentheses 16 months as the minimum, 2 years as the minimum, the middle term, and then 3 years as the max term. And then the 2 enhancements carry 3, 4, and 10 years. So what I did was I put the totals here for each term, the low, the mid, and the high, and then I ran the enhancements concurrently. So I didn't stack them. I didn't put 20. I didn't add the 2 10s for 20. So I just you run these enhancements concurrently, which is the way most judges, when there's more than one enhancement imposed, most judges will run that concurrently. So that's why you was hearing before that the minimum sentence is 9 years, and that's basically because they're running the enhancement, the low term of the enhancement, 3 and 3 together. Then they're adding the 3, the 1, and the 16 months. So that's the minimum sentence if it's run consecutively. Some of these sentences can be ran concurrently, so it doesn't have to be 8 years. So let's assume the judge wants to go give him the give him the low term on these sentences, but then he could run these 3 felonies all concurrent to count 1. So it could just be 3 years for all 3 counts, and then he could add another 3 years for the enhancement. So 3 and 3 is 6. So 6 is a realistic sentence if the judge goes on the low term. If he goes with the midterm, which is the maximum you can go unless the prosecution proves that there was an aggravating circumstances. But let's say the judge wants to go the midterm, he's probably gonna run counts 1, 2, and 3 again consecutively. Not consecutively. He'll run counts 1, 2, and 3 concurrently. So he's not going to add up 6, 1, and 2. He'll just say, I'm giving him 6 years, and we'll run counts 2 and 3 concurrent to count 1. That's 6 years, and then he'll probably add the 4 to it. So that's a 10-year sentence using the midterm. But the prosecution, based on this filing that I just read to you, they want more than the midterm. They want this high term. And this high term, as you can see, count one, the most serious of the three offenses, carries a 9-year sentence. So it sounds like that the prosecution is going to ask the judge to find true that that there was aggravating circumstances, and they're probably going to ask for the 9 years on count one, and they'll probably run count two and count three concurrent to count one, and then add 10 years to that. That's 19 years. So realistically, based on the tone of this filing, it seems like the prosecution is going to ask for 19 years. 19 years. So that's pretty much it. I'll answer a few questions and go over a couple of comments. But this will all take place on June 13th. And of course, the defense is going to file their rebuttal to this, and they're basically going to say that the aggravating circumstances does not reach the threshold as particularly vulnerable. They're going to say Megan, she's not disabled, she is not old, she does not suffer from, she's not a child. All the physical impairments that most courts would find that would fall under particularly vulnerable aren't here. They're going to say Megan was a strong, healthy, young woman. Therefore, she should not be found to be particularly vulnerable. So I don't know if where this is going to go. This is going to be an interesting argument in court. But if the judge does find that Megan was particularly vulnerable, don't be surprised for a 19-year sentence request by the prosecution. And if the judge denies the particularly vulnerable aspect of the aggravating circumstance, that sentence will be somewhere in the mid-range, some probably 6 years plus 4, somewhere around 10. And that'll all play out next month on June 13th. All right. I'm going to answer a couple of questions, and I also posted an article. Let me put a link to the article that I wrote that breaks all this down with this with the same chart there. And let me exit out this chart. And there's a link to the article. So there it is. Possibly on the low end, if he's sentenced to the midterm, probably get 10 years. And if the prosecution gets what they want, I wouldn't be surprised if they ask for that 19 years. And of course, the defense is going to say, let's run everything consecutively. I mean, let's run everything. Well, let's run the two enhancements concurrently, 3 and 3 on the low term, and let's run count one concurrent with count 2 and 3. So that means it would be 3 years total for the 3 felonies and 3 years for the enhancement. That's 6 years. That's what the defense is going to ask, 6 years. Prosecution is going to ask for 19, and he's probably going to get somewhere in the middle there. Okay. Let me see if there's any interesting questions here. Someone said, I think the judge can't sentence Tory until the second district settles. I haven't read anything so far regarding that. I know that Tory is scheduled to be in court on June 13th for sentencing. If there's anything that changes, or if you know of anything that changes, definitely tap in with me and let me know. Luck AP. Tory messed up. Definitely. Machiavelli says Tory ain't shoot that gun. Okay. Well, come up here and make your case. Tory ain't shoot that gun. What's going on with this new motion Tory's lawyers filed on May 19th? I haven't had a chance to get a copy of it, but I will, if I have time, I'll try to get a copy of that tomorrow and see what it's all about. This is would her being drunk make her particularly vulnerable? I think so. I think her being intoxicated would make her particularly vulnerable, but they didn't mention that. That was not mentioned at all in this filing. I hope the judge gets removed. We need a fresh set of eyes on this case. The judge was acting like a damn prosecutor. Oh, I completely disagree. I was sitting there the whole time. The judge was doing what the judges do. In fact, on that ninth floor, David Hereford is probably David Hereford. There's a couple other judges that are very fair. You know, I definitely wouldn't put him in that category. But you know, he's no nonsense. You're not going to go in there and bully him. You're not going to go in there and try to change the process. So he didn't do anything or act in any particular way that would get him removed. So that ain't going to happen. I could tell you that right now. Judge Hereford won't be getting removed because he didn't do anything to get removed. Can you differentiate the window being rolled down? Did they all appear rolled up? Oh yeah, all the windows were intact. There was no broken glass everywhere. There was no broken glass from that car at all. All those windows. You could look at the LAPD body cam, and you could look at the TMZ footage that they acquired from someone that was on the balcony. There is no broken glass from this car. Period. Where are all the people that think Kelsey or a ghost shot Meg? That's actually funny. Yeah, that was a good one. I did not see the motion Tory's lawyers just filed to remove the judge. If you have a copy of this motion, or you know the link to this motion, just tap in real quick on this live, because you guys were asking me the last time. You guys were asking me the last time. Did I get the new DNA evidence that Tory Lanez did? Did you get the sealed motion that the defense filed that has all this new evidence? And none of that turned out to be true. So I'm not saying this isn't true, but if you're actually saying that you have it, you read it, you've seen it, just give me the link, and I will definitely tap in with it. If it's about removing the judge, I believe that they're going to try to make an attempt to remove the judge to prevent the sentencing from happening on June 13th. Is it June 13th? I believe it's June 13th. I doubt that's going to happen. 19 years for a damn cut on the foot. No, you're incorrect. Relly Sunshine, it's 19 years for pulling out a gun. California doesn't play around when you take a gun out and you shoot it. That's pretty much what it. In fact, this he could have missed. Let's say he completely missed Megan. He would still be in some significant trouble. He wouldn't have the GBI, great bodily. Oh, actually, yeah, he could actually still get charged, I believe, um, with the same charges, even if he missed. Maybe the GBI might be slightly different, and he'll get some less. It'll be a few years less, but you could miss the victim completely and still get charged in California with shooting that weapon. Even you could shoot a weapon on New Year's in the air. That's a felony. Most states, shooting a gun in the air is a misdemeanor. In California, it's a felony. You're going to prison for shooting a gun in the air on like July 4th or New Year's. So yeah, it's a little strict here when it comes to shooting a gun. I wonder if you could shoot a gun in Texas and it's no big deal. Shoot a gun in the air, but you know, shooting a gun in the air is pretty serious because those bullets they got to come down and land somewhere. So then they come down with the same force. I don't understand what you mean by this. Why don't you tap in the link, Relly Sunshine? You got a lot to say, but I don't think you want to come up here and say it. Um, I did a video on 16 lies, inconsistent statements, misstatements that Megan Thee Stallion said while she was on the stand. So I've acknowledged that she was not completely forthcoming. I've acknowledged that she was deceptive at times. And that is not unusual from a victim. You know, it's not unusual. Just because a victim is deceptive, a victim is not telling the truth, doesn't mean the whole case gets thrown out. Who shoots at beautiful women? A short, drunk, angry man. That's who. Well, I guess if you have some information on this writ, is it published? Is it online? Has anyone discussed it? I guess on another subject, Blast Kings wants me to interview the East Sider's manager. If you have that information, tap in with me. You could email it to info@streetgangs.com, or you could just hit me up on Twitter or Instagram at AlexAlonso101. Who gets back in the car with the man who shot them, and a woman who beat her ass? Hey, you know, you obviously don't know the dynamics of domestic violence. That's like saying, why would a woman go back to a guy that just knocked her out and knocked out all her teeth? That's one of the most. You're very ignorant of domestic violence because there are thousands, if not millions, of women across this country over the last several decades that took an ass whooping, that took a beating, that was severely damaged by a man and went right back to him, and done that multiple times. So that point is completely invalid. Lamar Green wants me to talk about the new motion Tory's lawyers filed. Was it filed under seal? If it's filed under seal, then there's no access to it. But as you can see here, the prosecution filed this motion. It's not under seal, and anyone can get a copy of this from the court. And if you happen to have the email address of the prosecutors, they'll just email it right to your inbox. But it's already posted. I believe it's been posted online. It's been online all day. So if you don't see the defense's motion online, then perhaps it was filed under seal. I don't know. Ishak Kanduru. I'm from Toronto. I know the family. His dad is a pastor. He's loved the family. He's loved the family is pure. He did not deserve any of this. He didn't do it. Well, unfortunately, a jury disagreed with that, and Tory Lanez will be going to prison. His only hope is an appeal at this point. I definitely think he should do jail time. He is guilty. My opinion, he should. He is the lowest. He should. The lowest minimum and deportation. He has been a menace in the Los Angeles streets for a while now. A lot of people have been saying that for the last several years, Tory Lanez's behavior has been unacceptable, and people have been expressing the desire for him to get deported, and that's going to happen. The deportation won't happen until after he serves his sentence. So that's an issue that is the least of his problems right now. And he would be transferred after he gets sentenced in June. He will be transferred from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's to the California Department of Corrections to serve his time. After he serves his time, then he'll be transferred into federal custody, and he'll be sent to immigration court to deal with the deportation. So that's the way that goes, and that is several years away. And again, that would be the least of his worries right now. Zuri 211 asks, did Tory shoot in the air or directly at Meg? It's quite possible that a couple went in the air. It was 5 shots. They found 4 of the casings right there on the street of Nicholas Canyon Drive. So it might have been a couple in the air and a couple at the ground. I'm just guessing on that. There's no way to know. You can't even judge it by the audio. You can't be given all the D at one time and 2 girls. It was all jealousy. Blast Kings. Definitely the sex did play a role in here, although I know a lot of people want to downplay the sex. They just want to go straight to the shooting. But I don't mind talking about the activity. The sexual activities definitely led to this conflict. All the being sexually promiscuous with friends, that's going to go bad probably 7 times out of 10. So, yeah, sex did play a role, but most people don't want to have that conversation. Well, Lamar Green says technically he wasn't charged with actually shooting her. Well, that count 1 is assault with the firearm, creating great bodily injury. So he was charged with actually shooting her. The great bodily injury was the the injuries to her foot. So, but there is another charge. What I was saying earlier, he could have missed her. There's a charge of assault with a firearm that could create great bodily injury, meaning it misses the victim completely. But just because you miss the victim and the victim doesn't sustain any injuries doesn't mean you're any less responsible. So even if he missed her, he'd be in this pretty much the same situation. That's if the police were there to pull the car over and get them. So he's on goofy time for a while. So for those that just popped in, this is pretty much what the sentencing is going to look like from the low, the mid to the high. In this case, the judge cannot sentence Tory Lanez more than the mid. But this motion that was filed today is a way around that for the prosecution. The prosecution is going to say that there existed aggravating circumstances, and if they can prove that there were aggravating circumstances, then the prosecution could ask for the high. So this is very important in terms of the number of years he's going to get, because obviously the prosecution wants the high. That's what this whole 5-page motion is about. And if you look at the high term for count one, just count one alone, 245B, that's 9 years. And that doesn't even include the enhancement. So you add 9 years plus 10 years, because I believe that most judges that I've seen sentence will not stack the enhancements. They'll run the enhancements concurrently. So you add the 10 years to the high for count one, and then let's say they run the count two and count three concurrent to count one. 10 plus 9 is 19. And that's what I think this whole motion is about, is that so that the prosecution can go in and ask for the 19 years. Of course, Tory's defense team, once they get to this point, I'm hearing it from you guys that there's a motion to prevent the sentencing from happening on June 13th. But if it goes according to plan on June 13th, the defense is going to argue for the low. They're going to argue, give Tory Lanez 3 years for count one, run count two and count three concurrent to count one. They'll probably even ask, can you run, Your Honor, can you run the enhancement concurrent to count one also? Meaning that the 3 will be the max. Give him the 3-year sentence. I don't. I find that highly unlikely that he'll get just 3 years, but that is a possible sentence. That is a legitimate sentence. He can get 3 years for count one, count two, and count three to run concurrent to count one, and then 3 years for the enhancement to also run concurrent. But that's most likely not going to happen. If there is any sort of low sentence here that he can get that a judge might give him, it will be the 3 years plus the 3 years, 6-year sentence, which I feel 6 years is plenty enough for this offense. But the prosecution is pissed. They're pissed. If I was the prosecutor and I got pissed by some of the shenanigans that was going on social media, some of the shenanigans that's going on with some of the bloggers, some of the misinformation campaign that's going on about this case, I could see how the prosecutors are frustrated, because they're not only fighting in the court to bring justice for Megan Thee Stallion, but they're fighting all these narratives that are being circulated around the internet through Tory Lanez going on Instagram and making these allegations that there was corruption and things of that sort. So to all you guys that are supporting Tory Lanez and thinking that none of this is true, that none of it happened, that there is no shooting, it was glass, you guys are contributing to the problem here. You guys aren't helping Tory. You're hurting I believe you guys are hurting Tory if you guys have been part of contributing to this idea that it wasn't a shooting, it was just glass. So because of that, the prosecution's probably going to go for that 19 years. Zuri 2011 says, I remember Tory saying he was so sure he was innocent. He was asking so ridiculous, or acting probably so ridiculous on social media after the shooting. You know, that's a huge mistake that Tory Lanez made. And this is to all the defendants out there that are out on bail fighting a case. Shut the F up. Simple as that. Shut the F up. Don't say anything. Don't post anything. Don't do any music videos relating to this case. Don't put out an album called Daystar where you're referencing the case. Shut the F up. That's for all the defendants. And this guy is not a youngster, meaning like 18, 19, 20, and you're kind of ignorant and you're not being guided well. I believe he was 29, 30 years old when he got arrested, right? So I don't understand why he's not listening to his attorneys, because there's no attorney that's going to say, go ahead, Tory, go ahead, post on social media, post on Instagram, go ahead, do this song. But I will say this, the most recent post that he did on Instagram accusing the prosecutors of being corrupt, that had to come through the attorneys because he's in custody. So he's got to put that message out through his attorneys. I mean, he could have called whoever is his social media manager and say, do this. But would he really do that behind Jose Baez's back and go on a tirade on Instagram? I doubt it. So that means Jose Baez was cool with that. Most attorneys I know would never allow that. I can't imagine Tory Lanez just went behind his attorney's back and posted that on Instagram. It's possible, but Kelly says all the evidence pointed towards Tory. No evidence showing Kelsey shot the gun. These narratives are so funny when the evidence is black and white. I would say this. If I'd say 90% of the evidence pointed towards Tory, 10% of the evidence pointed towards Kelsey, and 0% of the evidence pointed towards Megan, 0% of the evidence pointed towards Jaquan, the driver. And because the defense said that they were going to prove that Kelsey was the shooter, and you got a 90-10 split, you're basically forcing the jury to pick one of two. This is a little bit different. You're not saying that my guy didn't do it and I don't know who did it. You're saying my guy didn't do it and this is who did it. So you're giving the jury a different sort of a different decision to make here. So when it's like 90% one way, 10% the other way, that's a easy call. Someone says here it's crazy how a manslaughter charge gets a lesser time than Tory. No, manslaughter, the max on manslaughter is 11. So the max on manslaughter is 2 years more than count one. So I disagree with you. The minimum on manslaughter, I believe, is maybe 3, but the max is 11 years. So let me look that up real quickly. Let me look up the penalty for manslaughter. And in California, we have 2 manslaughters. We got voluntary and involuntary manslaughter. Most states just have 1 manslaughter. So involuntary manslaughter, which this wouldn't be, would be 2, 3, and 4 years. But voluntary manslaughter, which this would be, is it's 11 years is the max. 3 years would be the minimum. 11 years would be the max on voluntary manslaughter. So there you go. That's 2 years more than count one. Machiavelli is definitely supporting Tory. They lynched that man. See, this is the type of rhetoric and the language that's hurting Tory. You know, calling it a lynching. No. Let me just correct Glizzy Hendricks. He did not get 19 years because the sentencing didn't happen yet. I basically said that if you read this new motion that the prosecution filed yesterday, they're trying to prove that there are aggravating circumstances in an effort to ask the judge for the maximum sentence. So I did the math on the maximum sentence here. The true maximum sentence would be 9 years plus 1 year plus 1 year and 2. So that's 19, 20, 21, basically the 22 years. But I think they would run it. I think they would run all three counts concurrent to count one. So that's how I got 19, 9 years plus 10. But it could actually go. It can go a little higher than that. But I don't think they would go. I don't think they would go that aggressive. Here's a good point here. Manslaughter is an accident. What he did was not an accident. It's intentionally shot a gun. Did he mean to cause harm? No, I don't. Well, yeah, he definitely intentionally pulled that trigger. We heard from expert on this particular gun that talked about how much pressure you had to put on the trigger. It wasn't one of those soft triggers that you just barely tap it and it fires. This was a trigger that required a little bit more pressure. So to pull it 5 times does mean there was some intent there to pull that trigger 5 times in a row. Tory is a convicted felon now, asks Zuri 2011. Previous to this case, he was not a convicted felon. He had an arrest. He actually had a gun case in Florida that he took diversion on, and he fulfilled all the requirements of the court, so he prevented getting a conviction on that case in Florida. But he's a convicted felon now, and now he's not allowed to have a gun. He lost all his gun rights, and that would mean he can't even be in a car that has a gun in it, and he could find himself back in prison after he gets out for this case. So no, he doesn't have any previous convictions. So here's some information on this filing by the defense. Look up case B328902. I'll look it up. Blast King says some people are just running their mouth. And based on this chart here that I have that can help you guide possible sentences, and keep in mind the judge can mix and match. He could run everything and anything concurrently, consecutively. What would you say is a fair sentence for Tory Lanez if you were the judge? If you had the power, how much time would you would you give Tory Lanez? And the chart is right there to guide you. Put that number below. This wasn't a case of domestic violence. It's a case of a drunk, jealous woman who couldn't control her emotions. I agree that it was a case of a drunk, jealous woman that couldn't control her emotions, but unfortunately, you're not allowed to shoot that drunk, jealous woman. And this case actually falls under the family violence division, which is domestic violence. So California law sees it differently. This falls under that, but you can't shoot jealous women. Okay, so nobody's reporting it because it is in Tory's favor. When you get a chance, look it up. How could it be in Tory's favor when you haven't even read it? At this point, the only thing that can be in Tory's favor is an appeal. And the appeal is at some point in the future. That's the only thing that can be in Tory's favor is an appeal. He is not getting this case overturned before June 13th. He is not going to stop himself from getting sentenced, and he is not going to prevent himself from being sent to the California Department of Corrections. So the only thing that's in Tory's favor is an appeal, and that's even a long shot. Yeah, Meg was going to try to sweep this under the rug until she couldn't. The state brought these charges on him, not Meg. And you got to thank the O.J. Simpson case. The O.J. Simpson case changed all sort of conflict between couples in the state of California. Back that was the O.J. Simpson case was 1994. 1994. So nowadays, DAs will go after. They'll go after the guy, regardless of what the spouse and the victim in the case says. Lamar Green says, I think he'll get back on appeal in 2 to 3 years. Here's another perspective. This was actually the defense theory. Kelsey shot Meg because of getting backdoor. Tory would have been chilling with Kylie if Meg didn't think of a plan to go back and cock block. Charlene Bennett. Part of a lot of what you said is true. Megan did go back. If she would have never went back, none of this would have happened. And you got to blame the driver for going back. The driver should have said, nah, Megan, I'm taking you home. Tory told me to take you home. But Jaquan busted that U-turn, I guess because you got this superstar in the car saying, Jaquan, I left my Louis slippers at Kylie's. I need to go back and get my slippers. Jaquan should have knew that was all game, right? He should have knew that was all game. But he went back, and we all know what happened. But I'm not so certain that Kelsey was the shooter. Most of the evidence points towards Tory. Very, very little of the evidence points towards Kelsey. But it's an interesting theory. Glizzy Hendricks says that Tory been wilding in the streets of LA for a minute, for a while. Blast King said you should do a documentary on the history of gangs. You haven't seen Bastards of the Party? That's a documentary that I worked on, directed by Bone, Clee Sloan Bone. Clee Sloan Bone directed that. I did a little bit of work on that. I would say I did more than a little bit of work. I did a lot of bit of work on that, and then I wrote the whole history of it in my master's thesis at the same time we were shooting that documentary. So if you haven't seen it, Bastards of the Party, it was aired on HBO. I'm actually not sure you can find it online right now because every time we find it, we strike it down because he's working on trying to get an exclusive deal to air that documentary on a particular platform. But yeah, that's the go-to documentary on LA gangs. You're extremely knowledgeable of the law and well spoken. I appreciate that, Blast King. For those who are unaware, I work as a criminal defense consultant. I've been doing that for over 20 years. I consult on criminal court cases just like this one. I've worked on over 600 cases, and I've actually testified in court on about 110, 120 cases. And ironically enough, I was once hired by the judge in this case, Judge David Hereford. I believe I worked on maybe 2 or 3 cases with him because he used to be a defense attorney. So I worked with him before on cases. He is now a judge. He's been a judge probably since about 10 years. So before he became a judge, he actually hired me to consult on a few cases that he was defending at the time. So over the years, I've learned a little bit about the law, and I've done most of my cases in the same exact courthouse, but some of my work has me traveling to different states as well. Tasha Talks Truth says a lot of people didn't believe Megan because she got back in the car, and that's sad. According to Sean Kelly, they picked her up and placed her back in the truck. Hey, a lot of domestic violence victims, a lot of spouses, a lot of girlfriends. Look, my mom worked in the domestic violence shelter for years, so I know everything there is to know about domestic violence. And don't be surprised. You shouldn't be surprised if you're unaware of it. Many spouses go right back into the same abusive situation, and it takes some time to eventually remove yourself from it. So there are those people that deal with it and go back to it and get abused again. So Zuri to 11 asks, what is the best case scenario for Tory Lanez? Well, here's the best case scenario for Tory Lanez in terms of sentencing. First of all, the judge has to deny this motion that was filed by the prosecution yesterday, and he's got to disagree that Megan Thee Stallion was particularly vulnerable. So that's the first hurdle, because that prevents any high sentence. Then the second part is that Tory's defense attorney's got to argue for the low term on the sentence as opposed to the midterm. Because if the prosecution loses their argument here, then they're going to argue for the midterm, because it's obvious they want the high. They lose this motion, they'll ask for the mid. So the best case scenario for Tory Lanez is that Jose Baez argues for the low, which would be 3 years for count one, and then argue for count two and count three to run concurrent with count one. So that'll be 3 years for all three counts, and then another 3 years for the enhancement. Those two will run also consecutive. So 3 plus 3 is 6 years. 6 years. 6 years is the best case scenario for Tory Lanez. And keep in mind, he's already got credit for, by the time he gets sentenced in June, he'll already have credit for 6 months. And also, if he gets the 6 years, remember in the state of California, you get released after you do 85% of your time. So we haven't even discussed that part. So whatever the years he gets, it's not going to be literal. You got to also calculate 85% of that. So let's say in answering Zuri 2011's question, best case scenario is 6 years times 85%. That's 5 years, 5.1 years. He already has 0.5 years credit. That means he'll do 4.6 more years. And that means he could be out in 2027. That's the best case scenario. 2027. I doubt very much he can get that 6 years because these prosecutors are going hard. And also, Tory Lanez did a lot of things that made it bad for him. You can't accuse the prosecution for being corrupt and then accept to get the low term. It's just not going to happen in any court. You can't go on Instagram and say that Alexander Bott and Kathy Ta are corrupt and then hope to get the low term. That's just never going to happen. So, but the best case scenario, I'd say, is 6 years. We'll see. Oh, wow. You wish nothing but the worst for Megan Thee Stallion. I guess some of you guys don't care if people pull guns out and shoot at people. If you don't like them, then I guess it's okay. If you don't like that person, shoot them, huh? If you can care less for that person, shoot them is what it sounds like a lot of you guys are saying. Adam Jones says his own witness places him at the scene, fire in a burner. Closed case. See, here's a little bit of the disinformation. I'm going to have to call it out. Relly Sunshine. Sean Kelly never said that Kelsey brought the gun out. I'm quoting you, brought the gun out. That's a disinformation. So let's call out disinformation when we see it. That's not the way the testimony went. And the transcripts are already available. So I don't know how you're going to say something like that when we got the transcripts. Salute Meg Thee Stallion for standing firm. Great point by Tasha Talks Truth. If Tory Lanez's own bodyguard did not take the stand for whatever reason, I'm sure you guys are going to come up with a million excuses. But if this guy's fighting for his life, and trust me, Tory Lanez knew these sentences, these possible sentences, before and during the trial. So you're going to fight for your life. And if you didn't do it and your bodyguard was there and witnessed the whole thing and witnessed that somebody else did it, and you told the jury in opening statements that Kelsey Harris is the shooter, why wouldn't your bodyguard come and testify? Why wouldn't Jaquan come and testify? Why would he show up at the end of the trial? Why would he show up? Why wouldn't he be there on the first day of the defense's case? Why didn't the defense attorney, George McDesian, have Jaquan ready to be his first witness? You got to ask yourself that. Case closed, right? Case closed. If your own bodyguard can come up there and say, Kelsey Harris is the shooter. I saw the whole thing. Kelsey and Megan were in a fight over whatever. Megan was punching on Kelsey. Kelsey was fighting back. Then she turned around, pulled the gun out of her suitcase, and fired 5 times. End of story. And in the process of Kelsey shooting the gun towards Megan's direction, he was grabbing it and trying to take it out of her hand. End of story. Ain't no way on God's green earth I don't have Jaquan there testifying on my behalf if that's how it went. Adam Jones says Tory Lanez is finished. Hey, I could tell you this. If the prosecution is successful in arguing this motion on June 13th and they go for a maximum sentence, this sentence is going to take Tory Lanez. He's going to be in his 40s by the time he's released from prison. And ultimately, his music career would be over. It would be over. Let's calculate his release date. His career would be over. Let's just say he gets that 19 years with 85%. That's 16 years. He'd have to do about. He'd get out in 2038. He might get out a little earlier for some programs. Let's say 2035. He'd get out in 2035. He's already 30. I believe he's 30 years old. Let's just say he gets out in 2035, and I'm being generous with that release date. He's 30 years old. He was born in 92. That's going to be 12 years from now. And that's generous. 12 years from now, he'll be 42 years old. Yeah, his music career would ultimately be over if the prosecution gets that maximum sentence. Hey, if he gets that minimum sentence, he could record a couple albums from prison. He'll get out. He'll still be in his 30s, and he can continue where he left off. Tory made a series of bad decisions. His behavior was just ridiculous, and the mouth is big. Praying for Meg. I've been shot at. It's traumatizing. It absolutely is traumatizing. Living here in Los Angeles, I've been shot at a couple times. I got shot at in my car while I was driving it. My whole car got shot up. So I know what that feels like. You think you're going to die. You really do. You think like, damn, if I can't figure out a way out of this situation, I'm dead. So it's extremely traumatizing. I remember one time I got shot at and I was a few blocks away from a friend's house. And miraculously, I didn't get hit, but my car was riddled. I drove to my friend's house. I pulled up right in front. He was on his porch. He saw the car damaged. He came over to the car. He's like, "What happened?" And I just started crying. Literally, I was bawling because I was like, I just escaped death. So I'm laughing and giggling, but it's literal. I escaped death. So I'm sure Megan feels the same exact way, you know. One time I was with a friend and we were standing next to each other and someone came by and started shooting at him. And he got hit, but one of the bullets went through his jeans crotch area and grazed his nutsack. Dude was standing right next to me and his nutsack was grazed by a bullet. That was crazy. And living in Los Angeles in the 1980s, growing up in the 80s and early 90s, There was a lot of shooting going on, way more shooting than there's going on today. So I'm so glad that my kids are growing up in LA during this time. There aren't as many shootings as there was when I was in high school. But yeah, it's definitely traumatizing. There's no doubt about it. The jury has spoken, guilty on all counts. Misinformation is coming from Meg's team too. I mean, you have had the opportunity to come up here and explain what you're talking about. In that court of law, there was no misinformation that was spread that would have changed the verdict. There was no misinformation that influenced the verdict in the court. But outside the court, you had Kelsey Harris doing rap videos, making Instagram lives. Megan did about 3 or 4 Instagram lives. Tory went on his social media. All of that stuff outside the court, that's all the misinformation campaign. And probably everybody contributed to it. But inside that courtroom, all that misinformation was pretty much stifled. Elite Leo says no, 6 years is not enough. He could have unalived her or anyone else in that area. He then went on to harass, stalk, taunt the victim. Hey, I agree with you. I agree with you. That was just the best case scenario. But I said that I would probably, being that I'm very sympathetic to people going to prison, I probably would give him 7 years. 7 years is a lot of time. And I look at it as, look, no harm, no foul, meaning no one was killed. 7 years is a lot of time to think about your mistakes, to think about what you did wrong, and to come out a better person. 6, 7, 8, I think is enough time to really look at yourself and come out and continue your life. You got to also remember this guy has some kids. He's got a 6-year-old kid, and he's probably the source of income for many people in his family. So this impacts other people too that are innocent. So I would probably lean towards the 6, 7, 8 years. But I completely understand your point, Elite Leo. He could have definitely killed somebody. But the fact of the matter, no one died, no harm, no foul. That's why attempted murder is a lesser sentence than murder. Because attempted murder means you trying to kill somebody, but because you were unsuccessful at trying to kill somebody, you get the 15 to life as opposed to getting the 25 to life. So I would lean towards that lesser sentence. But also keep in mind, he's been taunting not only Megan, he's been taunting the prosecution, and the prosecution's pissed. They're definitely pissed. You could read this motion, and there'll be a link after this live is over. I'll put a link. I already put a link in the to the article, and you can download a PDF file of this motion. But even though this motion is professionally written, you can feel the anger, or maybe anger is too strong of a word, but you can feel the level of how pissed the prosecution is, or are. There's 2 prosecutors. You can feel their frustration in dealing with some of the shenanigans surrounding this trial. You can feel their impatience now to deal with any other issues any further. So if you agree with some of those feelings and emotions that the prosecution might have, then you could probably understand why they're going to go for, up to 19 years, 15 to 19 years, which is what I'm expecting to hear from the prosecution. Oh, here we go. This is the reason. This is the shenanigans that the prosecution probably pissed about. It was glass. It was glass. Come on now. No one that was in this courtroom from beginning to end, from day one, from opening statements to the verdict, believes it was glass. And Tory doesn't even believe it was glass. Tory Lanez has not once argued through his first legal team, through his current legal team, through anything that was presented in trial, anything that he presented as a defense exhibit. He's not even arguing that it was glass. He's acknowledging, if Tory Lanez is acknowledging that Megan Thee Stallion was shot, why do you guys still persist to believe that it was glass? Why? Explain that. Tory ain't saying it's glass. And these are the shenanigans that most likely the prosecutor, especially the stuff on social media, that it's glass or any other things that are contributing to the misinformation campaign. How many of y'all believe it was glass? Come on, let me know. I'm just curious, like the level of delusion that we have in our society. Who else believes it was glass? How many of y'all really believe it was glass? Come on. And how do you step on glass and get an injury on the side of your ankle? Explain that. It's scientifically impossible to step on glass and get this injury. It's anatomically impossible to step on glass and get this injury. But some of y'all still believe she stepped on glass. Come on. Come on. Now look at this. Can you really step on glass and get an injury like that on the side of your heel? Now keep in mind, this was after the surgery. It's stitched up here. It's impossible to step on glass and get an injury like this. You see those stitches? So that's a photo of Megan's foot after the surgery. So you see the stitches there closing that tear, which is almost up by her ankle. So you can step on glass and get cut on your ankle, right? And then don't let me show you the x-rays where you see these fragments embedded into the foot. How do you step on glass and you have fragments that are going into your foot that need to be cut out? Tasha talks truth. She says, yep, mob radio played a big part of that. Yeah, any blogger, any platform that contributed to the disinformation campaign hurt Tory. Now, I'm not saying that mob radio contributed to disinformation. I don't have any information on that, but I'm just going by what other people other people told me. But anyone who was saying that Tory didn't do it, Tory couldn't have done it, Megan shot herself, and that contributed to the disinformation campaign, y'all hurt Tory. And anyone that's in this chat saying the same thing, spewing that rhetoric, is ultimately going to hurt him in the long run. Tory did not make anyone make comments. People simply didn't believe Meg. No, Tory actually took a position on that he didn't do it. And how could he do it? And then he did a song about how he didn't do it. And then he did a video blaming Rock Nation. Somehow Rock Nation is to blame here. How the heck is Rock Nation to blame? Rock Nation didn't pick the jury. I'm going to get off here in about 3 minutes. We're going to keep this an even 90 minutes. I appreciate everybody tapping in. I'll have all the links in the description. I have a link to an article that I wrote about this motion. I'll also link to the actual motion. And if you guys have any information on this defense motion that was filed, tap in with me. I have no problem reviewing it as long as it's not under seal. You know, the last time the defense filed a motion with the court, it was under seal. People getting mad at me saying, oh, I shouldn't be talking about it until it's unsealed. No, it's sealed. So it's not relevant at this particular point in time. And then when it got unsealed and we went in court and was able to see it, it was nothing. It was no new DNA. How many of y'all thought there was new DNA in this sealed motion that the defense filed earlier this month? Yeah, this wasn't a good move. When Tory came for the judge and blaming the system wasn't very smart. I'm also going to say that Jose Baez trying to remove Judge David Hereford while he's just doing his job, I don't think that was a good move either. So you're not going to get you're not getting any sympathy from the prosecution for the shenanigans that took place, accusing them of corruption. And then having your lawyer call out the judge is basically saying the judge is incompetent. So you want a minimum sentence now? Come on, man. Come on, man. I could tell you this. If Tory's legal team would have hired me, he wouldn't be in this situation right now. I understand this courthouse. I understand the 9th floor. I understand all the processes. I would have told Tory from the jump back in 2020. They probably wouldn't have hired me until 2022 when you get closer to trial. But if I was on the team earlier on, I would have said, Tory, stay off social media. Stay off social media. I would have took him. I would have went through that Daystar album and would have said, no, don't publish any of these songs. You got to be kidding me. So there's a lot of things that I could have done. I could have contributed to. I would have said, Sean Kelly is not going to come to court. We are not using Sean Kelly. Sean Kelly is not going to be a witness. And I wonder if Jose Baez gave Tory Lanez the go-ahead to say to the judge, don't ruin my life. Please don't ruin my life. I was there when it happened. I saw it. It seemed it could have been just a spontaneous reaction from Tory. He couldn't have contained himself. Or it could have came from Jose Baez saying, hey, man, you might have to plead your case here, because the judge was pretty much explaining how there's no reason for retrial. There's no errors in the court in the trial. So I don't think that helped him either. He played the race card. I don't think the judge is going to be so affected by it, but it still doesn't look good. It's a bad look. You know, you sit there in court and you shut the fuck up for every day you're in court. I usually tell defendants, man, put on some glasses, get a notepad, take notes from everything that's happening because it looks like you care about your case, but shut the fuck up. Sometimes you have defendants that just won't listen. And if you don't care about your case, and I don't care about your case. Man, I had a defendant that was on trial for the murder of a blood gang member. This dude, right before trial in the Los Angeles County Jail, he got a tattoo that said blood killer. I was like, what are you doing? You're on trial fighting for your life, allegedly killed the blood in a gang conflict, and you just tattooed on your body blood killer. Oh my gosh, but you won't believe this. We got a hung jury. We got a hung jury on that defendant. They tried him again. We hung again. They tried him again. Got 3 hung juries on that guy, and he got released. But that doesn't help getting tattoos, just not listening, doing things to sabotage your own case. And that's what Tory Lanez did. He did a lot of things to sabotage his own case. Why do I need to revisit EJ's testimony? He only alluded to the possibility that there might be a gun after the defense attorney kept asking and asking and asking. He just involuntarily say, yeah, there could have been a gun in the suitcase. Yeah, there might have been a strap in there. The defense was like, could there have been something in there like a gun, shaped like a gun, looked like a gun? So no, there's nothing to revisit regarding EJ's testimony. There is nothing to revisit. Briary says, got to commend the prosecutor for winning this case because it was pretty close. I will say that the first few days of testimony, I thought that Tory had a chance. Day 1, day 2, day 3. I'm like, okay, it's looking pretty good. But then they started making some mistakes, the defense, and then it just went all downhill. Day 5. The first day when they played Kelsey's audio, which would have been maybe day 4 or day 5 from opening statements. And then it just went downhill from there. I would have never allowed that audio to be played. And if the judge was going to admit the audio, because the prosecution wanted to admit the audio for one purpose, just to show that she was not pressured. The defense could have said, okay, let's just play 5 minutes of the audio, and it'll show she's not pressured. But they played the entire audio. After prison comes permanent deportation back to Canada. See ya. Hey, there's a chance he can fight his deportation. I've seen people get out of prison, fight them, and win them, especially if they have family that are American citizens. So if he has kids that are U.S. citizens, he's got a chance. Does anyone know where his 6-year-old kid was born? Is a 6-year-old kid a Canadian citizen or a U.S. citizen? Because that's pretty much the only chance he has at winning a deportation if he's got U.S. citizen children. Why didn't the hospital report a gunshot victim either the night she was admitted, Lofredo, or the following days when she came back? Well, She wasn't reported a gunshot victim in the emergency. That's where Dr. Lafredo was. She went to the emergency room. Dr. Lafredo said, "Hey, Megan, what happened?" She said, "I stepped in glass." So he just assumed, okay, this is glass, but let's send you over to get x-rays and we'll send you over to those doctors. Then when she got sent over to the other doctors, Dr. Haruno was did the x-ray and was like, no, no, this is not glass. Dr. Haruno asked her, "Hey, what happened?" She says, "I stepped on glass." But now Dr. Haruno's got the x-ray and he is about to do the surgery and it's clearly not glass. And then at that point, it was LAPD was alerted. So Dr. Haruno, I believe, was the one that alerted the LAPD. And Dr. Lafredo was the emergency doctor. He didn't treat it. He didn't do the surgery. He did a visual examination and sent her to get x-rays. And that's why in the LAPD initial report, it says that Dr. Lafredo said it was glass because that's what Megan told him. At that point, Dr. Lafredo had no information. He's just looking at an open cut. You can't see the bullet fragments because they're inside the foot. And it wasn't until the x-rays were done and Dr. Haruno did the surgery. Does that make sense? Relly Sunshine? Does that answer your question? Give me a thumbs up if that makes sense because a lot of people are harping on this. Give me a thumbs up if that makes sense. Give me a thumbs down if that doesn't make sense to you. Tory washed up. Well, we'll find out on June 13th. Here's a comment about the bodyguard, Jaquan. Jaquan is saying he's innocent. It doesn't matter what he says on his social media. He didn't come to court and say that. And he was in court. He could have said it in court, and he chose not to. Either he chose not to, his defense team chose not to, he chose not to. So it doesn't matter what he's going to, if he does an interview right now and says, oh yeah, Tory's innocent, the next question would be, well, why didn't you testify? That doesn't even sound, that doesn't make sense. He's innocent, he didn't do it, but you didn't testify. So is Tory Lanez facing deportation? He will most likely face deportation, but that doesn't happen until after he serves his sentence. He's got to serve his sentence first, and then he'll go to federal custody and deal with the immigration, the deportation stuff. Why did Meg's bodyguard go on the run to avoid testifying? You only go on the run when you're a criminal or when you're a fugitive or when you've been in charge or indicted. So he was on the run. That's probably an incorrect way to characterize it. And maybe he didn't want to go to court. Maybe he didn't want to testify. Maybe he wanted to prevent getting subpoenaed. And plus, he wasn't there, so I don't know what value Justin Edison, that's I believe who you're talking about. I don't know what value Justin Edison would have. He wasn't present, but he did receive the text from Kelsey saying that Tory shot Meg. His behavior caught up with him. Yeah, a lot of people is bugging. This man is washed. Them fake Louis slippers created this whole situation. You can't wait till it's revealed that I'm wrong? You mean you can't wait till it's revealed that the jury was wrong? The jury is the one that decided this case, but I don't see any major issues. Wrong about what? I don't really understand. You'll be visiting when the truth comes out. I don't think that anything's going to come out any different. The only thing that could happen, he can get an appeal. He could win an appeal. There'll be another trial. The same evidence will be presented, and the jury will decide guilty or not guilty. It's going to be the same thing all over again. That's usually what happens. Maybe a little bit of little different evidence, maybe something new, something different, but it's basically they're just going to run it back if he gets an appeal, and there'll be nothing really new. Maybe there might be. I've said that if he gets tried again, they could add bribery charges. So if you guys want him to get another trial, you might actually be hurting this guy because they could hit him with some more stuff. And if he's found guilty in a new trial, forget about the sentencing numbers that I showed you earlier. Forget about that. This changes. This will completely change if he wins a retrial. This is going to completely change. So keep that in mind, y'all. If he wins the appeal and they retry him, man, this prosecution is going to hit perjury and whatever else they can add. They're going to say, okay, you found a loophole in the system and won a retrial. We're going to run it back, but we're going to add a couple more charges. And if he's found guilty a second time, forget about this 19-year maximum. Then they're going to get 20, 22, 23, 25 out of it. And trust me, they are going to go for the max if they got to run this back again. But an appeal is also a long shot. It's not impossible to shoot a gun and you have no DNA on it. You guys must not know a lot about guns. You must not know a lot about the DNA from skin cells. The state's DNA expert actually testified if you're in a pool with chlorine and you touch a gun, you're not going to transfer any DNA from your hand to the gun. And even there are so many times that DNA is taken off of guns that we know were handled by someone and that there's no DNA or not enough DNA because it's trying to identify skin cells, DNA through skin cells. So it's a very tricky, it's probably the trickiest part of DNA. It's not so tricky when you're dealing with a blood sample. It's not so tricky when you're dealing with sperm. It's not so tricky when you're dealing with saliva, but when you're dealing with skin cells, it gets a little trickier. Like, for example, if I touch this mic stand right here, you would expect that I'm going to transfer some skin cells from my hand to this mic stand, right? And if you swab this mic stand, you might get my DNA. But if I wash my hands and I put some sanitizer on my hands, or if I'm in the pool for a couple hours and then I touch this mic stand, none of my DNA will be on that mic stand. So, you have to also understand the circumstances as well. Emmanuel Lewis, a Bronx native. Bronx, New York here. I was actually born in the Bronx. I was born in the McKinley housing projects on 161st Street. But I spent more time on the Grand Concourse, on 170th in the Grand Concourse, and then I had a grandfather that lived in Parkchester on Metropolitan Avenue on the Circle. And when I was a kid, I used to shop at a store called Alexander's on Grand Concourse and Fordham Road. I was just there not too long ago. That building is still there, but it's a different store now. I think it became a Caldors, and then it's something else. All right, people. I really appreciate everybody tapping in. If you got this new motion that the defense has filed that I'm unaware of, please inbox me. Send me the link. I'll read it, review it, and let you know what's the chances of anything happening with it. I did a video on the defense's motion for a new trial before they did the new trial motion, and I pretty much broke down what to expect in that hearing, and I pretty much called it that they weren't going to get a new trial, and I went through every single potential error. If you send me this motion that the defense has recently submitted, I'll go through that and tell you what to expect with that motion. But as of now, I don't have it. But definitely inbox me. I went a little too long here. But all the links will be down in the description for an article I wrote for this motion and for all the other things associated with this trial. People versus Daystar Peterson, Tory Lanez. He's scheduled to be sentenced on June 13th, but we'll find out what's going on with any motions that the defense has filed. And I want to thank everybody for tapping in with Street TV. Also, make sure you're checking out the Streets and Scholars podcast with me and FG. We post a new episode every week. You can listen to that podcast on your favorite podcast platform, Apple, iHeart, Spotify, whatever your choice is. And we also put video clips on the Street TV channel. And once again, thanks for tapping in with Street TV.